Hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. I would like to talk to you today about an area that is much less problematic than the Mekong Delta or Netherlands. But we also have some difficulties. This is Magdalen Island. I will talk a little bit about this area, those little islands in the middle of the Gulf of St. Lawrence. My presentation plan is, first I will talk a little bit about OURANOS Maritime Program. For those of you who don't know OURANOS, I will explain a little bit about this organization. I will present to you the summary and conclusion of our first 5 years of follow-up of adaptation. We start working on adaptation of coastal area in 2004. And now we have a little bit of reviewing of this process. So we are also in the strategic planning to initiate the next phase of projects, and they will include adaptation projects. And one of the conclusion of one of the experience that we derive from this first 8-year period is that we will not be able to avoid crisis, and crisis management actually do not include systematic adaptation programs. So we envisage to do some projects about this. So Quebec is eastern Canada, and the little circle that you see here is the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and this is about 3,500 kilometers of coastal area. And one thing first, the Gulf of St. Lawrence have a specific situation. It's at the edge of the inland, in the glacier, continental glacier of last glaciation. So the southern part of the Gulf is downlifting. It's sinking into the sea, while the north part is in an uplift, isostatic adjustment. So this is a peculiar situation. Okay, OURANOS, the organization I'm working for, is a small non-profit organization that have been created in 2001 by the Quebec government. And the partners are 8 ministries of the Quebec government, 4 universities, Quebec Hydro. This is, in Quebec, the electricity is produced 95% by hydroelectric dams, and Environment Canada. And we also have now associate members from other provinces of Canada and some companies. So this organization was created to take care about adaptation aspect to climate change. Quebec government is not very well organized to, no ministry of the government is equipped to produce climate modeling and scenarios and things like that. So this is basically the job of OURANOS. We have a climate group that is producing, that climate group is producing simulations at the regional level. We have hydroclimatic simulations, and also scenarios that are prepared specifically for Quebec. 10 adaptation programs, actually 90 projects that are science projects that are active. So it's something like $10 million per year of budget. And I will concentrate on this part. So Magdalen Island, as an example, is we are experiencing sea level rise there too, and extreme sea level. Here you have a typical surge, storm surge. Actually, the islands are the sea level. The net change in sea level relative to the ground is 4.4 millimeter per year of sea level rise. So it's the actual rate, compute over the past 15 years, I think. The Gulf of St. Lawrence, when we start studying the the impact of climate change on the Gulf of St. Lawrence, our first challenge was to decide, are we going to try to solve all the unknown aspect of the behavior of the sea level and the shoreline and erosion and things like that before we start adapting? And we decide not to do that. We decide to go through a complete adaptation cycle. I will explain that. We did that on 3 test sites on Sept-Îles, on the Gaspé area in Percé, and my last slide will show you a picture of Percé. And the islands in Magdalene Islands, they are just here, are in the middle of the Gulf. Okay, these are mainly made of sandstone and sand. So there is sea level rise, but also we are in a cold area, and this is ice pile up on the shore that may happen from time to time. And with climate change, the ice become more mobile, and this type of problem that can have a significant consequence when it hit houses and things like that is part of the picture, if I can say. So we have to cope with sudden storms that can produce a lot of erosion in a very short time. And here, this is a one-day storm that happened 2 years ago. And you can see all this eroded. This house was not suspended like that before the storm. They had a backyard, and the house was dismantled the same day. We also have a number of delta. These are not big as the delta we have just heard about, but the roads are passing through these delta, and very often when there is a heavy rain, and this is, as an example, the result of Katrina. Everyone heard about New Orleans, but Quebec is also affected by problems with heavy rain because the delta are at the end of the river, and very often the road system are not totally foolproof. Okay, cycle of adaptation. We established this little pattern saying, okay, if we want to go to adaptation, we first have to make a state of the art. What is the present situation? What is the level of adaptation of communities that we are studying, and their historic of adaptation? Are they very vulnerable? Why are they vulnerable or not? So we have to do that. We also have to pay attention about the impact of climate change on these coasts. So biophysical aspects, socioeconomic, producing climate scenario, analyzing the impacts, transferring this information to users. And the adaptation side is interaction between users, stakeholders, and scientists. You know, how we establish a dynamics of adaptation between communities, governments, civil servants, various departments, municipalities. How do we elaborate strategy of adaptation? And then we go to implementation. The implementation at this time, this is not our business. We do the job as scientists. We decide, okay, we propose things, and we discuss that with the users, and then they choose what they want, and they do it. And then, but we took care of the follow-up of that. Not formally, but, you know, softly on the back, we check what happened, you know, is it working or not? So, to initiate the project, we built a little society model, if I can say, or I would say it's a three-axis situation. See it as a three-dimensional picture. And this is the governance axis with local decision makers here and central higher government decision maker on the top. So as you move to the top, you are more centralized. Here's the science axis, and here what we put on the science axis was mainly biophysical at the time. We thought, you know, climate, we should understand the climate, and how it interact with the hydrodynamics, waves, and surge process, and geomorphology, and seismology, and at the end, engineering. And the third axis was the society axis. Basically, we have seen it as saying, okay, if we want to to go to adaptation, we have to discuss with people that will see the shoreline as an area for business or private property, and some other that will look at it from an environmental point of view or for community point of view. So it's kind of a left-right type of axis. And we were a bit concerned by the fact that the money for studies are generally coming from this part, and then when the studies are completed, the results are provided here, and then from there they are transferred to people at the local level. It's like if you have a negotiation between, because there is always negotiation on this axis. Here people are demanding technical support and money, and here people are saying, well, later, or no, or maybe yes from time to time. But basically, we wanted to overcome the fact that this situation is producing mistrust, because it's like, you know, when people are hearing of you here, they say, well, yeah, but you're paid by these guys. You're responding to the question asked at this level, and you don't tell us the truth. So the scientists had no credibility using that pattern. So we have decided to create a kind of a assembly of people from different components of this thing. We call a kind of a core of leadership. And then we transfer the information to the participants that are sent by different groups, and they propagate, at least, if they cannot propagate the scientific part, we can do that. At least they propagate their view about the process to their groups, environmental groups or municipalities or government groups. So this is what we use, and we create a research team, with 3 groups. And I have a little bit of a problem with my mouse. A group taking care of climate and hydrodynamic aspect, another one of the coastal science, geomorphology, and the third one was a user group with the same part of the budget than the other 2. And so we work with different groups, universities, and I won't expand too much on that. So we start the project with meetings at each of the 3 sites, and the meetings were called by local organization called ZIP. You see here, these are local environmental organization independent that choose who would be there. They invited people from the municipalities, environmental group, people living by the beach that have organization not representing themselves, but a group of persons. Fishermen, Chamber of Commerce, the tourist industry, and also people from the government, the upper government, people from various departments of federal and provincial departments that are involved locally in each of these sites. We discuss with them, we present the project, and we ask them to choose among themselves or out of the group 8 to 12 persons that would represent them, form a committee and represent them on our science team. And this group would be responsible to choose adaptation strategy, to decide what we will recommend. They would participate to writing the reports. They will be directly involved. So we formed these 3 committees, and during at several times we have these people meeting together. And the first thing we did, we showed them maps of the area with 3 scenarios. These maps were aerial photographs of the area chosen to be studied. And the first scenario was business as usual, 70 years of average erosion rates or change in inundation, typical inundation curves, submersion risk. So we showed this first scenario was basically like if there is no climate change, or the climate change in the future is exactly the same than we have now, well, we will have the shoreline continuing to move the same way. The second one, we use slice of 10 years or 15 years of time, and we compare the rate of erosion for 4 or 5 periods. And we took the highest one, because all the information we had was the erosion rates will probably go up and become more severe. So we said we will take the period where the erosion rate were the highest during that period of time, and that will become our average erosion for the next 50 years. We will assume that this is the next scenario. The third one was even more pessimistic. This one we used the 50% highest of this period rate of erosion. So that was placed on maps like this. So the map show you the per se area as an example, and there is, we don't see it very well now, but there is 3 lines, 3 color bar, and they show where will be the shoreline if the erosion rate follows S1, S2, or S3 scenario. Where will it be in 2050? We put these maps on the table with more detail than that. We see a concentrated part. And we ask them, okay, according to scenario S1, how will you cope with this? And we start working with them on this. So they could work at the same time than the science group. By the way, the science group received the same maps, same scenario. And what we ask them, which one of these 3 scenarios is the most plausible at any point of this coastline, at any segment? Which one will be the most plausible according what you know about this shoreline or what you will learn? So they had to find a way to identify what is causing the erosion, and it was not always the same thing, but I will show you some example. So we went through this process, and that worked very well. The people participated, they were very enthusiastic. We received a lot of good comments about this. And when we placed this little synthesis report, that is, by the way, available at the OURANOS website, if you're interested. This was written by there was a president and a vice president in each of the 3 groups, so they participate directly to this, the writing of this. And all the adaptation solutions are proposed in that, and all the process is done. Basically, we have been through the entire erosion cycle, and in fact, in some cases, municipalities had money to do some specific studies, and the government, during the process, there was more data acquisition done. At the end of this process, we start following up what happened, and we found that there was a number of cases of successful adaptation. First of all, it was definitely a very good step to increase awareness in the population. We were invited to give conferences, not only to the local population, but also to decision makers, city councils, to various part of the government. The ministry, the vice prime minister came to meet us. We had some agreement that was like land regulation planning were revised and safety regulation were modified in many of these 3 places. Memorandum of understanding was signed between the Quebec government and Magdalen Island with, I think it was $4 million to implement the decisions. They did the same thing with the Sept-Îles, but for some reason in Sept-Îles it did not work exactly the same way. Transport Department of Magdalen Island I'm using Magdalen Island all the time because this is an area where sea level is a major issue. Transport Department modify his approach for protecting critical roads. So, and the adaptation response propagate to other areas that were not on the project. So during a storm in 2010, we had a surprise to realize that traditional approaches were not anymore accepted by the local population because all this information circulates. But there was also a number of case of bad adaptation. There was, first we had bureaucratic jamming that are coming from various government departments, that have policies that are incoherent. And I can give many examples of that, like the Environment Department consider that putting sand on the beach is landfilling, filling an environment. So they have restrictions that were sometimes discouraging the use of putting more sand in area where temporarily we had to protect something that was not at risk. Missing participants, like the engineers, as an example, they were not in these committees. For some reason, they were at the edge of the three-axis little diagram, and they were not very present at our meetings. So when we go to adaptation implementation, the engineers are automatically involved because the municipality will call the engineers, and the engineers are ways to go. They systematically promote fight against the sea, rather than retreat or other options that are softer. So because of this lack of training to new realities, the engineers were very often counter-efficient in terms of adaptation. Turnover of stakeholder, the elections at every 4 years, the process takes more than 4 years. So in Sept-Îles, as an example, the city council changed. The new councillors did not receive the same training. When it came the time to accept $5 million from the Quebec government to do some of the jobs, they decided not to do it because they didn't believe in the process for some reason. Finally, it didn't work in that case. Political response to a better access to knowledge was not always positive. With this effort to transfer the knowledge directly to the people that are concerned was seen like a loss of power for those who are in the central government. They can choose what they want to say, what they don't say. So to some extent, there was a certain number of people that were not very happy with this. And that's okay. They got used to it. The cost of adaptation appears to be prohibitive in some cases because they do simplistic extrapolation. As an example, in Magdalen Island, the cost of adaptation was in the surrounding of $20 million. But if you multiply that by the number of little towns and villages, and you end up with an enormous amount of money for Quebec. But this is not so we realize that we need a global assessment of the cost. It is difficult for politicians to use taxpayer money that is available now to solve a problem that will show up in 30 years or 40 years. Generally, they push ahead the decision all the time, and eventually a crisis happens and it's too late. So I will use the example of Magdalen Island to show you. So this is the same area that you have seen in the first slide, but when the time is not sunny. One of the examples is of bad adaptation. As you see here, there is water above there is a little surge, water above the road in 2010. In 2012, there is a building right there. And this building is in an erosional area. The reason why it was built there is because the city could not stop the developer to build these condos because the policy of the government that is actually active is they have to calculate 30 meters from the first appearance of grass. This is safe to go there. Well, the good news is no one have bought any of these condos since. So we have been facing things like that, a number of storms, and if you're concerned about the seals, stop being concerned, they're going to disappear because there will be no ice, and they need ice to get born. When they have no ice, the females are placing the seals, are having the babies on the shore, and they don't swim. So a storm will almost automatically kill them. So you can see that this area can be very exposed to wave action and things like that. And when it comes to go to this part, the implementation, the Magdalene Island wanted to reconcile two aspects. They didn't want to lose their countryside. You have seen this nice picture with all these red cliffs. At one point in our meetings, they asked us, what happens if we protect these cliffs? And the answer they received from the science group was, if you protect the cliff, the base of the cliff, you may succeed to stop erosion, but the tie and frost process will continue to move the cliff backward, throwing the material down. They will lie down and be covered with grass. So all these geometrical forms and all these sculptures will disappear. Everywhere you protect, this is what will be the end result. So they decide to leave 95% of the island unprotected. They won't protect. I'm using this to make a kind of synthesis result of what we found. Basically, we find that the no-regret solutions, when all the adaptation cycle is done and you have choose your solutions, the no-regret solutions are easy to implement. You know, if you're sure that it's going to be efficient and useful and it's not costing too much, you can apply that easily and that work well. The moderately sensitive or expensive options are difficult to implement because of the cost, but also because sometimes there is people that disagree and it's difficult to, and at the political level it's difficult to convince people. So in such case, we have started a new bunch of projects that will be basically adaptation projects, structured exactly like a science project, with an objective that is a specific case of adaptation, a budget to do that, a time schedule, a project leader, and we try to find a good champion or ball carrier for each project, someone who is really dedicated to do that. So analysis of global cost is part of this because we have to insert that into the development. Okay, and the crisis management part. We expect that some of the project, and what we found is when a crisis happens, the government is well equipped to respond. They would go on site with helicopters, with the firemen, with the police, with everyone. They have shelters, they would have indemnization programs, things like that. But none of it is containing adaptation. As an example, they may rebuild people exactly where they were. They give money for adapting, for rebuilding. So people just rebuild. And sometimes, the way that this is done, they will evaluate the damage and maybe it would cost a certain amount to rebuild. And it's more expensive to displace, to move the house or build it somewhere else. So they will take the cheapest solution and 10 years later they have to do it again. So the system is not designed for adaptation. So the next type of project is to look at both cases, middle range difficulties of adaptation. We have seen some example that where this is working. As an example, in Magdalene Island, they have road problems. They were used to put rock. Now, the director of the transport department in the islands decided after our meetings to simply dump sand from a dredge site on the same sand that they have on the beach. He succeeded to overcome all the problems with legal and environmental and things like that were often a problem. And since that time, he's protecting the road not by rock, but by adding sand. But sand alone is not enough. He should now probably use some structure to slow down the sand, some sandbox or something like that. And we want to make some project like that. So coming back to this little graphic, we found that the sensitive points are at the extreme of the axis, like when we try to cope with people at the top here or the lobbies that are at the bottom, they are the most sensitive people to convince. engineers that have their way of doing things. This is a heavy mechanics. They are always coming with an argument that fighting against the sea is the cheapest and the more efficient solution. And they always work on a time span that is not looking at the long range, several hundred years, but on a long range, the cost of engineering approach are sometimes simply a dead hand. You know, they are not going linearly, growing linearly, but exponentially, like shoveling in front of yourself. You're working more and more. So this is something we have to be careful about. So we initiate a series of workshops to discuss all kind of things. Since the sea level will be changing for a long time period, is retreat the only option at the end? Should we envisage that? In Quebec, it's something that it makes sense to discuss. Maybe it's not the case when you have a very large population in Delta or things like that, but this is a problem we have. We should decide what is an acceptable risk. If we decide to move people or to constrain some people, how do we do that? Et cetera, et cetera. I will pass quickly on that. And finally, we develop a strategic project to prepare all the actors of crisis management with fact sheets and information that is helping and training to make them more efficient in inserting adaptation in the crisis management process. Of course, we also do some physical studies in the meantime. This is the result of a model of a surge, as an example, with a fairly good correlation. I just mentioned that we are not just working with population, but we also try to develop tools to anticipate future conditions and also produce early warning conditions that give us more time to react when there is a crisis. I'll leave you with these conclusions because my time is over now. But that's basically what we have done, and we are starting this project now. So.